Hey guys, Domenic Nesci here from Cribs, and today we have the infamous Michael Malek from Japm. Is it Japm?
It's Japm, that's
I'm
it.
so glad I got that right in the first
Yes,
time.
some people say Japm, but I say Japm.
Mate, thank you very much, and it's
Thank
so
you,
good to
Dominic.
have you. You're one of the boys from the hood, and I don't say that lightly. One of the inner Westies.
That's it.
That's one of the things that we actually resonated on. Now, Michael, just a little bit of an introduction, works for, I think, some of the biggest and actually all the biggest builders and developers in Australia. We met, I was hosting an event for Pace, and Michael does a lot of work for Pace, Sekasui House, and some of those really big guys. And what struck me about Michael is his attention to detail, his code of ethics, the way that he approaches construction, and his ability to very simply explain the way things should be done in the construction industry. And I just really needed to get you on this podcast so that our listeners and people that are out there buying property can get a sense of how construction should be done, how it is done with some companies, and things that they should be mindful of when they're going out to site and doing those inspections and things. So thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks, Dominic.
So without further ado, would you mind just giving us a little bit of a background in yourself, what you're currently doing, some of your clients, who you are, just a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I set up the company JPM. Well, it actually goes back to 2004 when I first set it up, and I've been contracting and consulting to a number of developers.
Yes.
And some builder developers as well, who have been working on site on some of their projects. So mainly large style developers, residential. Done some commercial projects, done some institutional projects. We're doing a job up at Coffs Harbour at the moment, a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre for the Pace Foundation. That's quite an interesting project. And we've done some fit outs, and we've done some subdivisions as well, so land subdivisions, quite large subdivisions. We work for developers as well as capital finance organisations who lend money, so we will play the part of the lender's representative to oversee and check some of the developer or builder works that are occurring to ensure that they're on track and the quality is up to scratch as well.
Okay, so you'd say very well qualified to help us understand what is a defect. That's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days. People go out, they buy an apartment, they settle on it, and there's often this big struggle between clients and the developer / builder to say, well, what's a defect? Is that scratch on the handrail a defect? Is that ceiling that's bowing? Is that a defect? I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on, what is a defect? Can you give us a little bit of a broad idea on what that is? And then later we can talk about what's a defects liability and how does that work?
Okay. So very simply, look, there is an Australian standard for defects, and they identify that. But look, in a very simplistic version, a defect's an abnormality that arises either out of incomplete works or faulty workmanship. That's really it. So, That's the baseline. There's what I would call in my work. There's probably about 4 different types of defects. So thinking about those in their relevant quadrants, I would we'd look at the first one, which I would call a design defect. So the design defect is something that in terms of the layouts, the initial design, you could probably look at how some of that hasn't worked properly. And by that I mean, for example, you walk into an apartment and the kitchen's wonderful, the layout's great, but they haven't allowed enough room for a fridge. You think, I wish they had a bit higher and wider, and I could get a 570 litre in, or instead of a 410 litre. So they're the things that you look at, and you call what I would call a design defect. Not enough room in the laundry. How they have nice little pokey laundries. Some of them are great, but they don't allow enough room for quite a large a dryer, if you want a large dryer, or a large washing machine. And then it's all relevant, but you look at that and say, I want this size dryer, but it won't fit in there. So these are what I would call types of design problems. Not having the toilet roll holder in the right spot. You're doing the yoga to try and get the clean yourself. So they're sort of things. Now, a lot of the times they're not fixable.
Yeah.
Because they're already set in the process of the construction. But having better designs, I think, is very important. So that's the first thing. Then the other thing I would say is there's the services defect, and this is to do with electrical, mechanical, hydraulic services, air conditioning. Air conditioning is a big thing. So as soon as you walk in, if the AC is not working, that's a problem. If the light switch doesn't work, or you press a switch and a different light turns on or something else turns on, that's a problem. If you're obviously the obvious defect that I've seen is your toilet's not flushing, the water hasn't been connected. These are service defects, but they can be fixed. Obviously, the builder has to come back, they have to fix it, reconnect, etc., change the wires. So I've seen these happen, but again, they are fixable. The other type of defect is what I would call incomplete works defects. Now, these are where you walk into an apartment, you're ready to be to have it handed over, and there's a knob missing off a drawer, or the paint, they haven't finished the final coat in a room, or you look where the fridge space is, you look up and there's a hole in the ceiling. You think, I need to patch that and paint that. So these ones, yes, they can be fixed, but again, when you walk in, these are the sort of defects that we've seen that shouldn't really be there. And then you've got the final one, which is workmanship. And that's really where, the broader range of defects most people see. The chips, the scratches, the carpet coming off in the corner, paint edges, rough edges on the doors, the handles not sort of, a bit loose. And you can go on and on about these things. So that's predominantly what I would call the 4-stage or the 4 key defect areas that we would look at and we notice.
And what does a client... Does a client have the right to come back and request those things be done, or how does that defects liability period work? What is that?
Okay, so what happens? There's 2 things. So a builder has a contract with a developer.
Yes.
That builder, predominantly under that contract, has what they call a defects liability period. So, and that usually is, in most cases, 52 weeks from the date that they actually contractually finish their works. So when a builder hands back to the developer, 52 weeks from that date, and there's a formal date in the contract for that, 52 weeks after that, they have to service any defect and repair, rectify any defect that was undertaken by them, by the builder, and that's under contract. So that's pretty much set in stone. Some of the purchases, when they've come in, let's say you bought a unit, you come in, sometimes you get a period of what they call the 90-day period to identify defects. So a lot of purchasers will think they've only got that 90 days to clear the air with making sure they've checked everything out and come back and identified defects back to the builder. But what really is the case that you've got 52 weeks. So and people just need to know when that time period starts and when it actually finishes. Most of the building managers of a property will know that date because they do an inspection before that date, maybe a month before that, to walk around the building to make sure that there's a final list of defects that are picked up before the builder sort of walks away from that 52-week defects liability period. So that's the range of time and usually what happens on a building. Okay,
and this is a little off what I've prepared, but how reasonable does a client need to be, a purchaser need to be with the developer or the builder with the broad spectrum of defects? Like, for instance, if I were to go in and buy $1 million apartment and then I see that there's a little bit of paint that's touching a skirting board in the wrong way, or there's some scratches on handrails and things, is it reasonable to say, hey, I want you to fix and give me a new handrail? And is that just a matter of who you do business with? Like, different developers will say, yes, that's reasonable, and others will say no?
Look, as I said, there is an Australian standard in terms of defects. It's generally what you can see within a metre with the naked eye. We have had people, with a magnifying glass down on the floor, checking everything. And in some instances, there is what we would call the unreasonable version of that. But predominantly where you've got a scratch on a glass, where you've got a scratch on a frame, where you've got a scratch on a balustrade, where the door, you can see it, it's obvious, to the naked eye when standing there a metre away. Yes, the developer, the builder must fix that. That's definitely something that is repairable.
And on that, do you think that the current standards are set high enough? Like, do you think that they're high enough to protect purchasers, and are they sort of monitored closely enough? And if you don't think so, where do you think there might be some failings or some rooms for improvement to protect purchasers? Because
look, the current standards are quite reasonable.
Yes.
I think there's developers out there that go the extra mile, such as Pace. We deal with other developers such as Cabe, and they will ensure that the purchasers are extremely happy. They, if they, have a list of 30 items after the initial walk around, 100% of the time they will attend to those and make sure that they're rectified. So that's the type of clients we work with. We haven't worked too much with what I would call the lesser grade developer or builder, but we have inspected properties that we've gone in as independent consultants to do defects. I won't say names, but we have been to areas where the building's been complete for 3 or 4 months. The builder wants to be paid his final payment. The developers brought us in. We've gone in and we've on a 100 unit development, we could have 75 pages of defects. With at least 15 items on each page. I mean, that's that many defects, and that is going through a few units and just on the external part of a building. That's unreasonable. That's very unreasonable. Some of the things that we see, especially in car parks, car parks, people just think, we'll just finish the concrete and put a sealer on and off you go. And there's cracks and there's unfinished works, etc. People drive their cars, they're $100,000 cars, $50,000, $60,000 cars. You want to make sure that, the car park's nice, you're not going to have dripping water, there's not dust that's going to, every time you drive through, you're not going to get dust coming off the concrete, which you do if it's not sealed. And you're storing things, so you want to make sure it's dry. So people forget that that's part of their home. They've bought this. So these areas need to be, finished off properly. So coming back to being reasonable, I think a purchaser buying a $1 million apartment, it's reasonable to expect that everything is in order and there are no defects.
The same way you buy a $100,000 car or a $50,000 car and there's no defects with that.
Correct. You go to any car dealer, and if you can spot a nick on a car, guess what? You either get a big discount or you'll get another car, or you'll just pick something else.
I like that. So back to some of the building standards and things. And the reason why I'm asking you these questions and why we're touching on all of this is because there has been a lot of media hype, and it's not just hype. There has been issues with different towers and buildings falling over, getting cracks or sinking and all that kind of stuff, and cladding this, and there's been issues in the market. Do you think that can you comment to some of that, or can we talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that we are seeing, or how builders and developers can avoid it, and are these mistakes happening because they're not following regulation, or are you doing something more or extra that allows for your buildings and your sites to run so smoothly and cleanly? Was that question clear?
No, 100%. I there's a couple of things in there, I'll cover both. One is in terms of standards, Australia's got some of the highest building standards in the world. I used to work in Dubai and India and Egypt, and we especially in Dubai, we actually utilised a lot of the Australian New Zealand standards as well as the European standards. But Australia holds some of the highest levels of building standards in the world. The thing is, we have a standard for pretty much everything across the building industry, and the idea is if we stick to it, if we build to those standards and we have the process by which we supervise and check and sign off and guarantee that we've done in accordance with that, not just on paper but actual visual check. That one, the subcontractor, the guy that's doing the waterproofing or doing the painting or doing the rendering, is actually doing his job properly, and then coming back to check and sign off and say, "Yep, I've checked it, it's done." If we just stick to that simple process, you'd have a lot less problems. And I know that there's so many people in the industry that will agree with me, because a lot of the time it's push, get it done quickly, let's get out of here. But there's not enough time and effort put into, one, teaching the younger generation how to do things properly, and two, spending the time in going in and checking and doing it. A lot of the bigger, more I suppose, affluent developers and builders, you'll see their quality is pretty good. And there's two reasons. One is they put enough time into the job, and two, they have enough manpower on the job. So, a lot of the times, there'll be a site and there'll be some builder there going, "You know what, I just ran this job with 3 or 4 blokes." And you go, "Great, good on you, you've saved some money on staff." But have you done it properly? There's no way you could have built a 100-unit development or 50-unit development properly with only a few guys on site. It just doesn't happen. Or you've done it and it's taken you double the time.
You're talking about PMs and construction.
I'm talking
managers.
about builders, and I'm talking about project managers that oversee it, and developers that ensure that that's the outcome they want. So it all starts with the developer. If the developer has a culture of quality and consistency, and it's not just about the brand, it's about the culture within that company. About I want to hand over really good quality product, then you've got to have a process. And the process is having the people and the follow-up and the sign-offs and the checks to do all this. So if you don't have that, you're going to get something. It may be okay, and it may be not.
And what are some of the common mistakes that you see or hear about? Like, you're in the industry, you kind of sniff and hear and understand what's going on out there.
Look, it is dog eat dog out there. You've got everyone's trying to finish a project as quickly as possible, and everyone's developers are trying to make the sale at the end of the day. Now, as I said, there are a lot of developers out there that are really good, high quality, and they work the job. And they put the right builders and the right managers and the right consultants on there to ensure what they start out with is exactly what they get. Mm-hmm. And that's the important part. You can lose so much in that. And I don't mean by the actual building, it's the process, the understanding and the supervision time by both the builder and the project manager and the consultants in doing that. So you've got to have that up front. If you don't, it's not going to work, or it's a hit and miss process.
Okay, so from what I'm hearing, some of the biggest mistakes is rushing and the process and just monitoring the site correctly.
Correct. That's it. Now, to rectify that, or to ensure that you don't have those problems, there's a few things that you can do, and we can talk about that. The peer review process.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So what that is and there's a few developers now coming up with that. It's not a hard. It's a very simple process, and there's and I mention PACE now because through them we've actually done it before. We're just now doing it on a much bigger scale, and that is, making sure that your structure, your waterproofing, and your fire services are all overseen to the nth degree. By that I mean you've got a structural engineer that designs the structure of the building. By getting a peer review consultant, so it's an independent consultant that comes in, and he oversees. Now this guy is very well experienced, national accreditation, basically ticks all the boxes for a perfect or near perfect engineer. He'll come across and oversee the design. So he'll comment on the initial design, he'll certify it, so he'll say, tick, yes, I've checked that. So not only your original engineer, but you'll have your peer review engineer come across and tick that off as well.
So let me hold you there. So what you're saying is you get you get your highly certified or qualified professionals to come in, set the design for these major parts of the construction, and then you get a second or an additional company outside of the first one to check the work of the first guy.
Correct.
Or the first person.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, you every engineer does things a little bit differently, but predominantly there's, the slab, the footings, and these are, the footings are what holds up the building. They'll even check the foundations, which is the type of ground that it's actually the building is sitting on, whether it's rock, whether it's clay, whether it's sand, and they'll make sure that the design is based on that type of foundation. Then they'll look at the actual structure, and they'll look at how big the footings are, how big the slabs, the thickness of the slabs, the type of reinforcement in the slabs, the columns, the beams. So they'll go through that and agree, both will agree, the design is correct. Tick, move on. What's the next stage is overseeing it. So actually, while it's being constructed, you'll have your primary engineer for the job going through and signing off. So before a concrete pour, they've already done a check. They've checked that the reinforcement is in place, the right reinforcement, the right numbers, the right sizes, and he'll tick that off. Now, the peer review consultant, the independent, will also come and do his own inspection and tick it off and say, yep, correct. So if there is a problem, you've got two different people raising that if there is a problem. So you're covered in that sense throughout the whole of the structure, basically till you've topped out and finished. So once you've topped out, you've got the roof slab on, all the columns done, the structure's done, finished.
So that's not common practice.
No, it hasn't
do the
been.
Peer review method.
No,
because that's almost scientific method. The scientist says, "Hey, this is what I'm doing," and they get their peers to review their work.
Correct.
And just check if it's all correct.
Correct.
And is this commonplace, or is this an emerging practice, or are more people doing this?
I think it's only just starting to be taken up by some of the developers now because of the issue of cracks in buildings, slabs, showing movement, etc. So I think people now, the general public, are seeing these type of defects and not really accepting them. So what's happened now is this process is, and it's not anything major. It's just really paying for someone to come and do what someone else is doing, and just being doubly sure for that extra insurance, getting that comfort level that the structure is going to be fine.
So does that slow the process down a lot, or cost much more to do that? Because I imagine, Pace, Sekisui House, Frasers, all these bigger companies have reputational risk. They've been around for a long time, so they're not in a hurry or rushing to get their sites out of the ground. So it makes sense for them to slow down, maybe spend a little bit more because they don't want to have any issues.
To answer your first question, the timing, no, it doesn't. It doesn't take longer to do because the design, you're doing the check design before anything's happening. The guys are on site preparing the site, etc. You're doing this work already. It's just that time in the background to do it. It's not the job will stop because this isn't happening. It's happening in parallel.
Okay.
There's other things happening. So it will not deter from or extend the time of a building job. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the cost. Yes, it will cost a bit more to have a independent consultant to come in and do that. But in reality, what's another $50,000-$60,000 on a on a $40, $50, $60 million job?
Right.
It's not much.
It's not crazy.
And it's a little bit more. It's like taking a little that extra insurance policy out.
Yep.
So it gives you a lot. As a developer, it will give you a lot more comfort. As an owner and purchaser, it should give you more comfort knowing that, what, I have had two guys look at this thing. That what more could be done. Everything that could be done has been done.
That speaks to the integrity of the people doing the building, and then it just adds that layer of confidence.
And that goes also for waterproofing and fire, which I mentioned. Now, waterproofing is always a big issue in bathrooms and balconies, etc. So the same is also happening where there's a waterproofing consultant that comes in. You've got your main consultant, and they go through the building and they test. Now, that's one of the things that is required for the occupancy certificate. So the private certifier on a job will come and inspect 10%. He will physically and visually inspect 10% of the bathrooms to see that the waterproofing has been undertaken correctly. However, what's now being done is, such as PACE, they are undertaking 100% of all of their bathrooms are tested and checked and certified by the primary consultant. They're also getting an independent consultant to do exactly the same. So number one consultant will come through, and number two will then follow through. So they'll organise times. Obviously, you're not doing it all at once. You do 5 or 6 bathrooms at a time. So that's what happens per level. So the consultant one will come through. He'll do a test. He'll let the water out because they'll undertake the waterproofing. They'll block it up. They'll put water in, and they'll actually test it.
Okay.
And then the second consultant will come in, they'll drain the water, they'll fill it again, he will view it, and he will test it, and he'll sign off. So you've got 2 sign-offs for every single bathroom in a building that identifies that the waterproofing is sound and intact.
Wow. It sounds like it's a much more deliberate process than what I anticipated, than what I've seen out there as well. Mate, thank you very much for that. Let me just ask you now, how do you manage the defects at settlement, and how should a client approach managing the defects? Like, how do they go about making sure that they're getting the right building and things are all correct? Like, they're not construction managers or project managers.
That's a good point. We when we sit with our clients, we look at a project in 3 stages. It's the first stage, which is the design and review stage. So even if we're not there at the design stage, we only come into the construction, we'll still look at the design phase of the project and say, we'll comment on it. If we think there's something there that should be changed before the construction starts, we'll give that advice. The second stage is obviously through the construction, and we run through that whole process from the day one to last day of construction, and we'll manage that process. Before final day handover, we have what we do, the defects management process. A lot of the clients previously thought that was a bit of an extra cost that they didn't need to have, and they wanted to come and manage that process themselves.
Clients being the
Developers,
developer.
correct. Okay. And we used to put a lot of time and effort into that process. That's what we generally do about 3 months. 3 months out before the final handover of each of the apartments. And what we do there is that defect management is we start walking through, this is the finished, or just before it's finished, we'll walk through and start to defect every apartment. So we walk through with the builder, unit by unit, area by area, and we'll do the outside after we do the units, and defect the units with the builder. We'll hand over that list, or if it's done on a web-based system, then it's on the computer. They have it on their iPads. They'll go away, they'll fix them up, and they'll call us back, and we'll check that. So that's what we call stage 1. Stage 2 is when we the purchasers come in to do their walk around. So they'll come through. Let's say the builder has finished everything and he's ready to hand over. The developer then brings in the purchaser. We'll walk around with the purchaser.
So you'll help the purchaser, and if they don't have you, should they go and get an independent consultant?
Yeah, we welcome building purchasers to bring in building inspectors to walk around, because at the end of the day, some people feel comfortable that they've got someone outside of the process.
Makes sense.
And we welcome that. So whether it's a building inspector that will come and we'll walk around with them, they'll identify defects, we'll log them, and we'll take that and then send it off to the builder. and make sure at the end that the builder has finished all of those. So by the time the purchaser is ready for settlement, all the defects should be completed. So when they walk in, turn the key to walk in, there should be nothing left. Now, having said that, a lot of the time you don't pick up defects until you've gone in, started, use the dishwasher. Started living. So you might find a couple of things here and there that pop up. There's there may be an adjustment of a cupboard or something later, or the fridge has got a scratch that I didn't see if the fridge came with the apartment. And then there's a process by which that's logged through the building manager, and will ensure that the builder jumps onto that and completes that work as well. Now, we have that through the 3-month process. During our construction phase works, we actually start a bit earlier. So on the structure itself, the main structure and the building, before the units are, let's say, finished, we still do what we call observations and defects. So when the structure goes up, our guys go in and we start to look at the quality of the concrete, if there's any, combing, what we call combing, where the concrete hasn't been finished properly, where the brickwork isn't correct, or whether the walls aren't straight, or whether the surfaces, are sort of mishmashed in a wall. We like to see things done neatly, so we try and push the builder to set their surfaces nice, neat, and correctly, so that what happens when you put your plasterboard wall in and they go to drill, they're not drilling through a pipe or through electric cables. So we check all that as well as, at the end. Yeah. So we run that process through what we call our day-to-day reviews to ensure that the actual quality of the stuff that you don't see is still sound and of a good quality, or of a fair quality.
So then let me ask you, because I do a lot of site visits and like to go out to site, put the hard hat on and just see what's going on with the different construction sites and buildings. When you go out and you're not always the head contractor or whatever, and you go and see what's happening out there, what are some indications, or what are things that purchasers should be looking for that are indications of a well-run site versus a poorly run site? What are things that kind of get your attention when you're walking around a construction site?
Look, for me or my team, it's you walk on site. As soon as you walk on that site and you look around, you'll pick certain things. You'll know whether things are running smoothly, or the team is on par with understanding how quality projects work. First thing is you're looking, is it a clean site? You walk on, if it's dirty and dusty and there's rubbish everywhere and there's piles of crap over on the debris left there that hasn't been cleaned, you'll know straight away that this isn't, that there's some quality issues here. If the culture isn't to set the site to be clean, daily, or if not weekly at least, that's the first sign of problems.
Who sets that culture? Is it the builder, or is it
It's the builder. It's the builder. Okay. So we will ask the builder on numerous occasions, and this has happened, where we walk on a site, we'll see things, and we'll say, guys, you need to be, for safety reasons, you need to be clean. So can you clean these levels? Can you clean this walkway? Can you take the debris from the from the side of the site, etc. Can you make sure you've got more bins? So we'll ensure that happens, but it's really a culture within that building company whether they actually run a clean site or not. So other than cleanliness, you walk around and you'll see, how is the work being undertaken? So is there cables strung everywhere? That's a safety issue. So if they're not taking safety seriously, then they're not taking quality seriously. So that's another trigger that you would look at. And the third thing is, how are the workmen, being managed on site? So if you're walked into an area and you've got a painter, a renderer, a carpet guy over here, and someone fixing plaster, whatever here, you think the place is a mess. This is crazy. This is very poor management. So the idea is to methodically and systematically run your projects, structure up and finishes, where you can, following through. in a very systematic and methodical way. So the idea is keep an eye on what's happening, where you're walking. Is it safe? Is it clean? And do the guys, do the actual construction team, the site staff, know what's happening? You know, you'll ask the foreman, okay, well, what are you guys doing today? Oh, we're roughing in the services up on level 7. Oh, okay, well, what are you doing down the bottom? Oh, we're starting to paint. Okay, that's great. And you walk around, there's no painters there, and you know, there's someone else doing something else. You think, well, you need to know, you know, you need to know what you're managing. You know, if you don't know who's on your site and who's managing what, that's a problem.
Okay, that's interesting. So for a purchaser, some of that stuff is harder for them to understand. But so if they walk on and they want to see that the site is clean,
yes,
they want to see that it looks or feels safe. So there's no debris, wires, and things hanging around,
yep. And
then it looks like it's well coordinated. You know, you don't want to see workers jumping all over each other, and it's
correct.
A bit more not frantic. People
correct.
are doing the things they should be in the times they should be.
Correct.
Michael, thank you very much for today. I feel
Pleasure.
like we've gotten to touch on a whole heap of topics that are very important, especially now when there's so much fear around that construction process and you know, what's happening with brand new developments out there. After talking to you today, I feel a lot more confident. It's great to know that there's people like you out there that are so diligent, you know, almost applying a scientific method to trying to get these sites so well run. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, Dominic.
Hope to have you again.
Thank you.
See you guys.